Hey guys, thanks for joining me again. Today I'll be covering my dental school application with the specific numbers as well as comparing those numbers to the averages. Some specifics I'll be going into are my GPA, my DAT score, my shadowing and volunteer hours, as well as my personal statement. I will then go into the selection process for the schools that I applied to. In my case, I applied to 20 schools, which sounds like a lot, and it was fairly expensive, but I'll explain why that was also worth it. As always, I'll be leaving timestamps down below, so if you're only interested in part of this video, check those out. Now, to calm some of your fears, I just want to let you know that my numbers aren't necessarily reflective of what you need to get into dental school, which means you can have variations in these numbers and still get into dental school. Now, to get started, I'm going to talk about my GPA. One of the main questions I got in my undergrad was what my GPA was. I think this is because most people don't take the DAT until the summer before their senior year. This is because most people don't apply to dental school until at least then, if not later, if they're planning on taking a gap year. Now, my GPA when I applied was a 3.45. To some of you, this might sound low, and to others of you, this might sound kind of high. But to kind of explain my GPA, I have to admit at the beginning of college, I did not do that well. I had a fairly poor academic performance my first 2 semesters, which I then had to make up for in my next 3 years of undergraduate work. Now, if you have a low GPA, don't freak out. Especially if you're an underclassman, don't freak out. Your chances of getting into dental school aren't any less. And the reason that is because most dental schools like to look at the trends and not necessarily just the GPA. So if you're a freshman taking freshman level classes and you have straight A's, that's great. But that's not going to really compare to someone who has straight A's in classes like organic chemistry or biochemistry or anatomy or physiology. So not to say that your straight A's isn't a good thing. It is a great thing to have straight A's, especially at the start, but they're mostly looking for a trend in your GPA. So for example, my first semester in my undergrad, I had a 2.97 GPA. Luckily, there was still an upward trend in my GPA, but it was hard work to get it up. So again, while your GPA matters, it's the trend that matters most. So if you have a low GPA, especially if you're early in your college career, you can bring it up and you'll be fine. Just make sure that no matter what, you try harder and you find ways to improve yourself. Because in the end, on your application, you can put things down like, I learned this as I was trying to bring up my GPA. Or I learned how to be better at this because of my experience with my GPA. Now, when it comes to the DAT, this is something that is hard to gauge, especially as an underclassman, since most people don't take the DAT until right before they apply. My advice would be to learn everything you can in your classes and really learn it. Don't just memorize it, cram, and then forget it. Try to learn it and keep it somewhere in your long-term memory, because this will make reviewing for the DAT a lot easier. I promise you that if you compare your GPA to your DAT score, it might not always work out for you. So the mentality you should have is just to study hard for the DAT when it comes and to do your best. Now, going over my scores, I got a 21 academic average, I got a 21 total science, I got a 21 in OChem and a 20 in general chemistry. I got a 22 in biology and a 21 in both quantitative reasoning and the perceptual ability test. To some of you, this might not sound like a great score, but it's somewhere around the 85th to 90th percentile depending on the year, so it's not too bad. But the thing that I am most proud of with my DAT is that I was fairly even on all of the scores. Meaning that although I didn't score like a 27 in one section, I also didn't score a 15 or a 16 in another section. This is important because if you score a 15 or 16 in a section, you're probably gonna have to retake the DAT, especially if it's a section like biology. Now, when it comes to shadowing and volunteering, my shadowing hours ended up being around 75 hours and my volunteering hours ended up being around or a little bit above 200 hours. Whether this sounds like a lot or little, your mentality as an undergraduate should be to say yes. So if you are offered a shadowing opportunity, you should take it. Or if there's opportunities to volunteer, even though it's not what you're comfortable with, you should do it. This will not only add diverse experiences to your resume, but this will give you new perspectives. Moving on to the personal statement. I know this is something that a lot of people ask for right before they apply. They want to read other people's personal statements. And so if you want to read my personal statement, contact me and we'll work something out. But that's not really going to be the most helpful thing, just because my personal statement is just that. It's a personal statement. It's not going to work for you. I mean, it'll give you some ideas, but really you're just looking to explain why you want to become a dentist. Some other things that you can explain in your personal statement are stories that show that you're a hard worker or you're compassionate, or really just kind of show your qualities and why you'd become a good dentist. Now, when comparing my numbers to the averages, the average GPA of an incoming dental student is about a 3.54. I think the average DAT is somewhere between a 19 and a 20. I think it goes up a little bit every year, and so it's probably a 20 now. And then when it comes to shadowing and volunteer, there isn't really an average. There's an average between each school, but there's not an overall average that I can find. But I would say, again, like I said in my last video, and just to reiterate, anything above 50 and preferably at least 75 is the mark you want to hit. I don't say at least 75 because that's what I got, but the minimum is usually around 40 and you want to be above the minimum. Now, moving on to my selection process of what schools I applied to, first thing I did was I looked at where I wanted to live and where I was okay with living, and I crossed out any school that didn't meet that criteria. I then moved on and looked at the averages for their scores, including their DAT, their GPA, their shadowing, everything, and I looked to see if I would fit the mold of what they're accepting. This means that although I might not necessarily meet everything perfectly, I'm around the average of what the average class is. So my GPA is a 3.45, which means I didn't really apply to any schools that had a GPA average above 3.6 or any GPA average below 3.3. Obviously, there were some exceptions with schools that I really liked or were kind of like dream schools, but all in all, I kind of followed that trend of keeping the average school's GPA within 1.5 points of my GPA. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't apply to schools that seem more out of reach. Obviously, apply to them if that's your dream school, work your hardest and try to get in there. It just means that every year you don't get into dental school is an extra year you're not going to be a dentist, which is, in terms of salary, that's dentist salary, that's, and doing something that you enjoy, not being a student. So I would say, all in all, if you really want to be a dentist and you're happy living somewhere, it shouldn't bum you out too much if you don't get into one school over another school. That being said, it's really your choice on where you want to apply. Just make sure you cast your net semi-wide. Again, I applied to 20 schools, and that you kind of meet the criteria of the average student for most of those schools. Now, if you're interested in this video and you felt like it was useful, please hit the like, subscribe, notification button, as I will be releasing more videos about my pre-dental experience as well as my dental school experience. My next video will be about my experience during COVID-19 for all you people entering dental school right now who might not have started yet. So make sure that you stay tuned for that one, and I hope you guys have a good week.